I've chosen to look at the pandemic as a fortunate fall. Essentially, there are always problems. This one, of course, is epic magnitude. But I've tried to look at what can we get from it? What can we do with it? How can we be useful? And in regard to my own teaching, which I've been doing all year on Zoom, of course, it's in many regards far inferior to being in person in so many ways. Not the least of which is there's no way for a conducting student, to play with a pianist in real time unless they're in the same room, and they can't be in the same room because of the COVID. So there are many, many compromises. However, just to cite a couple of examples, my students who are studying, doctoral students who are minoring in conducting at USC, oboe players and organists and violists and so on, heretofore, when we were in person, their ability to hire an orchestra radically limited the size of what they were dealing with. So they were doing recitals for 8, 10, 12 players. What I negotiated with them is, why should we do that since you're not going to be able to do that as a recital? So we've been doing Brahms symphonies, Beethoven symphonies, Mahler, Shostakovich, Sibelius, Debussy. We have been grappling using recordings, albeit admitting the limits of that, with significant repertoire. The second thing is that I've chosen, because my way is extremely personal. For me, it's all personal. I've engaged them in the virtual modality the same way I have in person. So I have jokes. I ask them about their lives. I'm trying to make the connection, which in my view underpins all successful teaching. And frankly, I would say that the growth and progress these students have made has been at least as good as when we were in person, which is not to say I would trade it, but rather than whining about it, I'm trying to do something about it. And in that process, there's another secret sauce. They can't go anywhere. So they have way more time. They are like mofo prepared. They are doing the work. They are keen. They are eager. They show up with the gun belt on. And so for me, that has been a way to look at it from a different perspective. The second thing is, I have been working with friends of mine like Stephen Nachmanovich, who is one of the great human beings I've ever met. And some of you may know about Stephen, who's an improvising violinist. And he and I are improvising using latency as part of the improvisation. So we're actually turning latency from a liability into an asset. I also have tried to inspire my students as composers, because I have several who are studying with me, what to do about it. And they have created some absolutely astonishing outcomes that wouldn't be possible even in person, because they merge video and audio content in a way that's very sophisticated and very original with each one of those students. So, I mean, I could go on, but I refuse to be paralyzed by this horrible moment, because I don't want to wake up 10 years from now and say, why did I just sit on my hands? I'm going to do something so I can remember this as a useful opportunity for them. And a second correlate that's unrelated in a way to the COVID, but because of events that have happened in the United States, I feel that a lifelong quest that I've had, which is about the LGBTQ community, has finally started to take root and become a viable part. And so that to me is a really exciting part of this time. I'm not sure without the COVID, it would make any difference, but I think the COVID has allowed us time to really look and think about the world that we want to create. And this has ended up being for me a zenith of happiness and joy, which in the end is, I just, on my tombstone, it just says, I still want to help. I have no other, I just want to help. And so anyway, there are many more things I could say, but those two things to me are important. Fortunate fall, not paralyzed, turn this baby into an asset in any way that I can. And second of all, the boundless love of people for their difference.
What I've learned, and I think a lot of people learned, is how little control we actually have over our lives. and things have been changing so quickly, and governments or companies or whatever it is have been changing laws and rules constantly, and we've had to adapt. But in some ways, a guy like me who's always thinking too much or thinking ahead, it was very good for me to just sort of start taking things one day at a time and really understand what is in my control and what isn't in my control.
We just have to adapt to change and be willing to explore new ways to do things. Whether that be, teaching effectively, how can I do that via Zoom in this online format? Or how do I play in my orchestra 10 feet apart from my colleagues with a mask and a bell cover on, and still feel like I'm making good music? But, we adapted, and I loved what I learned from it. I loved, like Dan did, my students recorded themselves, and I would always have this collaborative teaching and learning tool for the last 10 years. I would record part of my students' lessons, and other students would listen and make positive and constructive criticisms throughout the week. And that was a great tool, but I stopped doing it when the pandemic hit, and because the students were pre-recording their lesson material. What I liked about that I think I'm going to continue, and I know that's reaching onto a subject we're going to get to, but is we listened together to those videos, and what those students learned from that, listening to their own playing with me, I think was really profoundly effective. And so I'd like to implement that in the future. The other thing that I struggled with personally, and I know our students did, was just motivation. Literally, I had just gotten off an Amakitia duo tour, and 2 days later, our school was shut down. Thank goodness I got home. And I was not one of these people personally who did the a cappella app and, oh, that'll be fun. Nope, I was not motivated to do that. It probably took me until the summer to really get myself back on the clarinet myself. And so, and that's after being in this business 30 some years. And so learning how to self-motivate, even after being a seasoned musician, I think that helped me think about some ways that I can, in the future, motivate my students. So I think the biggest thing is just stay creative. That was my big takeaway.
And I think that really this became a big call to action for me and for the students, in terms of just, as all the panelists have been talking about, how to handle this, how to handle such a total shift of the model we're all used to working around. And I think in a way the students had to grow up a little bit quickly and faster, and it put things into perspective. So really what I found was that it was remarkable how well they adapted. I mean, what I said to all the students, we started having some classes in the summer to get ready for the fall, and I'd never tried all this stuff online, but I really got into it. And I sort of said to them, look, we can be bummed out about this, but we can't do anything about it. And I said, guys, look, you could just decide to take a year or two off studies and just wait for this to all pass by, hopefully, if it does, and then say, I'll come back when everything is normal, as is in the before times. But the problem is, I'm not sure that the world's going to wait for all of us. And so if once things get going again, auditions start up again, interviews for teaching positions, do you want to find yourself having waited that now you're in an almost double cohort situation where now there's twice as many people turning up to everything, and you've waited and you've lost a couple of years. So let's see, I have no idea if this is going to work, but let's see together if we can find a way using all of these various tools to keep your learning happening so that you don't lose that critical time. And really, almost to a person, I was really pleased with how well they all stepped up. I'm not an IT genius, and so very often, they were helping me as much as I was helping them with the specifics of how to use some of these recording programs and put things together. And it ended up being a very good year. I really believe that what I saw from this was that the fundamentals are the fundamentals. I don't think that teaching this way is as good as being in the same room with someone. It surprised me how much we take for granted, not only hearing someone, but seeing someone. I'm so used to sitting next to someone and I can look over and look at their fingerings, at their embouchure, get a sense from look at their posture, what's happening with their air. And suddenly I had to say, no, wait a minute, can you hold that up? Or, can you do that again? And so, there were many times where you sort of realize, wow, this is really limited, but you have to do it. I'll tell you, I've been doing this for, again, as Professor Barger said, about 30 something years. I went 6 months without doing an in-person lesson. That's just never happened. Like, I haven't gone 6 days without doing an in-person lesson. And I went into school and we did do some limited in-person stuff, and then then they canceled it because our numbers did not go well, and have not been going well here in Ontario. And I just remember looking at this student from across this room through a plexiglass shield and saying, I see now, like, music lessons having happened in person, in the same space for hundreds of years. I think this really is the wave of the future. Like, there was just so much I'd been missing that it was such a sense of relief to have that back. But nevertheless, we had to go forwards. I did chamber music coaching with a clarinet ensemble. And, just as we sort of decided not enough people wanted to keep doing it in person, when we had the option, then the school said, no, actually now we're going to pivot everything to fully remote. And the guys were really amazing in how they adapted and helped us all through the software and all of that. So I got a lot of respect for these young people, for their ability to adapt. But I also felt responsibility myself as a teacher, because I think some of them at least were looking at me and all of us to sort of see, well, how should we handle this? And so I thought it was a really golden opportunity to inspire.
In normal times, students are running around from chamber rehearsal to orchestra to lab orchestra to their theory classes to all the different things I have to do. And I think that it's difficult to really stop and really self-assess. Well, as Maestro Livingston pointed out, everything did stop, and our education of our students didn't. But our students were in a place where they couldn't run away and run from rehearsal to concert and whatnot, and they really did have to stop. And the thing that has come away for them with this is that we've resorted to recording and Zoom and that whole thing. I've encouraged them always to record themselves, but now they're actually really recording themselves and really hearing the objectification of themselves and the ability to truly diagnose what's going on and to hear themselves as they would listen to somebody else.
I do a seminar in Japan every year, like very beautiful up in the mountains outside of Tokyo, that Charlie Neidig and his wife Ayako do, and I'm like the third wheel. Well, last summer we couldn't do that, and we did it all online, and it was really interesting because first of all we had auditors. Now, when you're in Japan, the only auditors are 5 or 10 people from around, within an hour that show up. But now you had auditors from Finland and, Uruguay or whatever. So personally speaking, I don't see why, even if things ever get back to where you're in these beautiful mountains in Japan, why you wouldn't now have auditors from Uruguay or Venezuela or whatever for $500, and how wonderful for them that they can, audit in these things. I also think people mentioned Zoom lessons and you don't, quote, need to go live. Now, again, as everyone's been saying, there is a big difference. At least I think everyone agrees there is a difference. But, I actually quantify it and I say maybe it's 80%. And I think a lot of what this has done has accelerated movements in a direction that we're already going. Okay, so I think, I imagine the technology in 2 or 3 years of online lessons and stuff is going to improve again. So I myself guess that if you were living in Brisbane and all of a sudden, your flute teacher down the street says, we're having Zoom lessons, you can't come over right now. And all of a sudden you get online and you say, wait a minute, if I could take online lessons with her because she's, or him because he's 2 blocks away, I can also take online lessons with someone in Sweden, or it doesn't make any difference. It's just in front of my computer. So I can't tell you how many people, I'm using Australia because there's many times I've seen Australian students graduate and they'll go to Europe to take 10 lessons with me. It's like sort of a big project, and they'll stop by Hong Kong and take a few lessons. I imagine if I'm in Australia now, if in 1 week I can get 20 lessons with 20 people, okay, for 3% of the price of what I used to do, granted at only 80%, this is now going to be something that I'm going to be exploring. For example, and I think we as teachers and as students, I guess, we've learned what the limitations are. So I fully admit there are limitations, but I'll take someone as far as I feel I can take them online, say with a piece, and I'll say, okay, that's it. We've done this. We'll move to the next one. When you come in for a live lesson, we'll go there. And so I think all these kinds of things are also going to be coming into play in the future.
I would just agree with Peter and some of his points that he made, regarding teaching and some of the things that I know that I will continue with. Like my clarinet literature and pedagogy class, I knew I was going to be teaching that this spring, and I was pretty sure I wasn't going to be on campus. And so I took all my PowerPoint lectures and I recorded audio on them. So when we did meet via Zoom, because these poor students were so zoomed out, right? Yay, one more class online. So rather than meeting twice a week, since we couldn't do that in person, we only met once a week via Zoom. And it was more of an informal talking about things that they had viewed in my pre-recorded lectures. And I'm gonna teach this class the same way from here on out, except hopefully we'll be live one day a week. And the same thing with lessons. If a student is sick or something and I can't make up a lesson, well, why can't they do some pre-recorded, and I can at least write some comments, when they feel better, rather than trying to make it up later in the week when I don't have time. So I can see that as an added benefit in the future when things get back to normal, whatever that will be.
I guess my teaching life, which is now like 50 years, it ends up being a circus of gestalts. And the one that happened now is this is really about the student. So I am shifting my pedagogy to make it much more about students asking me questions, student driving the experience, and asking them, what do you want? And I started this year telling my students, because I had time with them on Zoom in a unique way, from now on in, when you are in class, you need to, and when the teacher says a declaration, you need to say why. And then what do I use this for? What is this about and why? So that the sort of interrogative relationship that classically defined the Socratian method, etc., is brought back into play. So that's been a really driving gradient for me this year. And partly it's been the case because I have witnessed the ingenious capacity of these students. As we live in the Neanderthal era, they never knew what it was like not to have a computer. And their techno chops are frightening. I did a Mahler talk on recently for our orchestra. I was asked by Carl St. Clair to do that. And I did a Mahler talk, and I collaborated with a former student of mine who's a techno genius. And I realized that I've been doing some PowerPoint and technology-based presentations that are a joke. This young man was like out of control wizard. And every time I mentioned it, I'd say, well, just do that. Okay, we'll do this. I'll do this. I'll press that button. I'll do this. And I realized how easy it is to get into the routine of static. Here's Monday again. I'm teaching how to play Behrman, that scale again. Volume 3, that slow C major scale. I'm using a metaphor in your world. I don't do that anymore. I had a ritual burning of all those books recently. I thought I'll use them for kindling, but instead I just had a ritual burning. But the essence for me is to remember that it's not about teaching, it's about learning. And so I am trying to remind myself what Schoenberg said. It's not about teaching what you know, it's about teaching what they need to learn. And I'm going to continue to push hard on my students. Okay, talk to me. What do you want? And how we're going to get there. Why aren't you taking a class in the Marshall Business School? So my wife's always saying to me when I'm complaining, and I'm a virtuoso crybaby, I'm a tremendous whiner. I mean, like redlining on the whinometer. She goes, what do you want? And I tell her, she goes, you realize you're going this direction to get this. So I want to help the students with their steerage, with their ability to say, okay, what's your goal in 5 years? I think I had that conversation with Ceci more than once. What is it going to look like in 10 years and how you're going to get there? And the issue isn't that you have to have all the answers. The issue is if you start now, when you deviate, you'll understand why, rather than being just in a kind of a random walking around in the desert. Now, with respect to harvesting what we learned on the technological side, I plan to do supplemental teaching to my students. LA is a commuter place. If you haven't looked at a map, LA is like, it's a huge city and our students live all over. And I'm planning to say to a conducting student, you know what, you're doing fine. Let's Zoom tonight. Let me help you alone. You stay home, I'll stay home, we'll fix it. And a lot of what I'm teaching can be done actually vicariously. I don't have to have hands-on, although I miss that because the physical part of conducting is obviously a core issue. I'm also planning to have them teach themselves. Okay, Judy, you really got this. Billy, you're struggling. Judy and Billy, I want you to set up a Zoom later today. When you're home, I'll be on there. I was going to say eavesdropping, but I'm a man, it'd be more like Adam's dropping. And I will be watching this to help you so that we're cultivating the idea of student as engine, not as passive recipient of the wisdom of the King of Spain. So those are some of the ideas that I'm pursuing. And I, as you can tell, I'm very excited about next step. And for me, this is among a few the gifts that have been dropped in my lap because of the COVID. Again, fortunate fall. There's always problems, always, all of us, all the time, navigating problems. Granted, this is a big one, but if you develop the chops to navigate the big ones, maybe the small ones seem more manageable.
You know, with all of the other things that have gone on, to be able to stop and assess who you are as a person and what your belief system is and how you're going to look at other people. And, you know, in my studio, I've learned myself and introduced to my students this intrinsic bias assessment test that came out through Harvard University. And it's this, this whole plethora of different topics you could assess your implicit biases, these things that we come to any given situation with, any views of how we grew up, what we view people as without even thinking about it, and challenging my students to stop and think about how they view a given situation before they make a judgment and maybe make different decisions.
Well, first of all, there's a deluge of literature and social commentary all over the place, which was largely not present in the past. And second of all, it's encouraged, I think, student interaction, even on Zoom, at a different level of sensitivity and care. And I am a cultivator of that in every way that I can. I tell my students, seek the difference. The world we want to live in is one which is a rich gumbo of difference. And you have a chance at a university to be connected to that. And so in every way possible, I'm a kind of advocate for it. I also think Dan has raised a really interesting conundrum. And that is, on the one side of the coin, there is the idea of trying to look at traditional criteria for getting a job. On the other side, there is the effort to adjust to horrendous inequity that has plagued our society for more than decades.
Change is a constant, and it was before the pandemic. And so for them to be prepared as young musicians, or whatever it is they're going to go and do, to sort of pivot and stay afloat and just navigate through, and being more flexible. And yeah, I mean, I wonder if that's a generational thing. I mean, I think Andy or Dan was saying that when they were young, Dan was saying he just figured I'll practice really hard and there'll be a job for me and it'll be fine. And I mean, they're definitely this. I get the sense the students don't feel like that now, and didn't before the pandemic, but they really don't now. So yeah, just developing related skills, and as many have said, keeping the central love. I mean, why am I doing this? And remembering, I mean, there was something at some point that made us all turn on to making music this way, and we're just on fire for it. I remember hearing a recording of Scheherazade, and it just blew me away. And I was a young kid, and so hanging on to that through the tough times. But I think for many people, it's a tough industry at the best of times, and this may not be the best of times in the next 10 years. So yeah, I think that those two things are going to be really important.
The thing is, it's the life of an artist. And I always tell my students, and I'm sure you all have too, it's not like we're not aiming at the job. Because if you're aiming at the job and making the money, then go work on Wall Street or go get a degree of an MD and work in a hospital. But the life of an artist is one where the carrot at the end of the stick is always moving away from you. And it's a journey, it's baby steps, it's aiming towards something that's way far away, that is never, it's in pursuit of perfection, we get better, right? Perfection doesn't exist. And, I can tell you, I felt almost after every concert I've played, I want to throw my clarinet away and throw the reeds away and do something else for a living. But the next morning you pick yourself up and you go find another reed, and hopefully the next show will be better, right? I mean, so it's the journey. And I tell my students that that's what it is. You're getting on the staircase or the escalator, and as long as you're moving and you're thinking, you're going to go in the right direction, hopefully. So, and I think that we have to remind them that this is the life of an artist. It's not, there's no guarantee. There's no, degree that's going to get you the gig, so to speak.
If you look at things universally, there's been a shift when you're actually looking at jobs. If you want to talk professionally, for example, Dan mentioned the Met. I mean, certainly when we were growing up, the Met was considered the kind of holy grail of job security. Like if you got a job with the Met, you'd probably have an income, and that took about 1 week. But now you look at Germany, I mean, 70 odd, all government employees, and no one's taking any pay cuts or anything. China, and so I think actually I've seen myself in various, there have been, believe it or not, examples of openings worldwide, and you actually see shifts in popularity of positions and where you might want to end up at, this country or whatever it supports the arts and has has provided security there and values it, and other countries say, well, this is not essential, and let's cut it and that kind of stuff. And I've seen a physical shift in how people are viewing the landscape of attractive employment.
Yeah, and I would just add, on some of the things that were said here at the end, it reminded me of one of my lessons with Robert Marcellus, and it was a conversation of, Diane, do you have the fire within? And it was the question of, do you have it in yourself to work this hard to have this career that you want? And it was a great conversation, and I have that conversation sometimes with my students, and I think that's what we just went through this last year and a half is testing all of our, ourselves, our students. Do you have the fire within? And if it's important enough to you, we can find our way out of it. We just have to be adaptable, be creative, and keep that fire lit somehow.
The quality of playing of young people is staggering. And then you think about, here are all these great kazoo players, and there's 3 jobs. And how do you justify that? I think there was a time when we were guilty of not sharing with students what's out there. That's over. They all know. But it's very important, I think, to remember that when a student comes to college, that kid may want to be an engineer, but they're not an engineer right now. They might want to be an accountant, but they're not an accountant right now. They might want to be a chemist, but they're not a chemist right now. Our kids are doing right now what they want to be. They're already musicians, and they're living in that special world which they were drawn to ineluctably, because music tends to choose us. And once you're in it, even though it may seem irrational and competitive and so on, the deep-seated passion and the neurological chemical connection to doing, we all know from neuroscience about oxytocin and dopamine being fired. I mean, this is an addictive form of behavior. And I think I feel personally blessed that music has that effect. And it draws us all together, from the least talented and least skilled to the most talented and the most skilled. And to me, that puts our kids in a different category. And the fact that they've chosen it, and it's a hard road, okay, yes, it's a hard road. But I think if you put up a sign and said, you can just all drop out right now, you know you're not probably going to get there. You already borrowed a ton of money. Your mom is furious because you didn't decide to become a computer programmer. You can quit right now. My guess is we'd have very few takers, because it's in the blood. And I believe you can't even be completely human without music. It doesn't have to be my music, but it's, you know, Oliver Sacks tells us it's built into the neurological hardware of humanity. And for me, I feel that I wish I could press a magic button and give them all jobs. But at the same time, I feel so ecstatic, so euphoric that we are all part of this magic show. And for me, this is priceless.